Go. Awesome. We are live on Facebook.
All right. Cool.
Cool. Good morning, Facebook friends.
There I am. Weird.
I know, that's what I was just checking on my phone also. I was like, did it come up? Because I'd hate to run through everything and not have it actually record and stuff. All right. So good morning, Facebook friends. Again, I am jumping back into recording episodes for the Allison Loves Math podcast. And this morning, I am super excited to welcome Denis Sheeran for this second recording today. I don't know, Denis, if you knew, I was actually recording earlier with Laura Link, who does test prep. Yeah. So it's been a fun morning. All right. Well, let's jump in. All right. I'm going to do a silly countdown just so my podcast editor knows where to start the episode. All right.
Perfect.
And then we'll jump in. Cool. Welcome to the Allison Loves Math podcast. I'm super excited to introduce today's guest, Denis Sheeran. He is the author of two fantastic books, Hacking Mathematics and Instant Relevance. He's a former high school math teacher. Oh, there's the books right there. Yes. A former high school math teacher and track coach. He's now a senior math consultant at the Rutgers University's Center for Effective School Practices, working with school districts to improve math teaching, tech integration, and school leadership. Welcome, Denis. I'm so excited to have you here.
Definitely. Thanks for having me. I know you said good morning. It's you're out in California. I think it's good afternoon to me over here. So
that's right.
I'm excited to have a conversation with you today. And I'm personally glad that it's not in the morning because it's the last day of winter break and I'm not getting up so early anymore.
I know. I usually do the interviews at like 7 o'clock in the morning before the kids are up and stuff. But it's like you said, last day of winter break. The last thing we want to do is get up that early. So this late morning works well. Mm-hmm. All right. So you have this book, Instant Relevance.
I do.
You do. It's a fantastic book. And I want to talk to you about the relevance of math. So a common complaint that students and parents and everybody has about math is that it's not relevant. They say, math is not relevant. I'm never going to use it in real life. What's the point of it? I'm going to ask you, do you agree or disagree with this statement?
I totally disagree with the statement, but it's not so much the statement as the generalization of what goes into that statement. Because like you just said, students and parents and communities, and it's like, there are so many issues with the way that we grew up with mathematics that lean into that, because we have the exact same parent who will say, you're never going to use that in real life, but you've got to get an A in that class to get into college, and that's how you're going to use it in real life. And so they're wrong about most of it, because you are going to use it in real life, or maybe, just maybe, you as an adult are never going to use graphing rational functions in real life. Ooh, that's true. It can happen. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to have an opportunity to look around you and recognize that there's mathematics in something, and then think, is that worth learning more about? Is that worth understanding more about? Can I extract some mathematics from that situation? And do I have even the slightest knowledge base about it to be able to apply it and throw it in there? Can I make this happen? Can I make this work? Or like the hashtag from the book, can I make this real? Can I make this a part of my life? And so to those who say math isn't relevant, what they're probably talking about is stuff like graphing rational functions and long division, because those things aren't really relevant. And you might even say like, well, I divide all the time. I'm like, yeah, but you don't long divide. You're out with 7 people at dinner and wait, that doesn't happen anymore. But when it does happen, if you're out at 7 people at dinner and the bill comes to, whatever it comes to, you just kind of break it up in your head, break it up into pieces, throw on a tip, and you're like, all right, or somebody at the table does. And that's how we do it. We use partial quotients. We use estimation. We don't use long division. So the mathematics that they're referring to is often just the procedural, step-by-step, Mad Math minutes, multiple worksheets, straight up, completely abstract algebra that only a few people really do use in their lives. The relevance of mathematics doesn't come from what Dan Meyer called in an NCTM talk, it's pseudo-context, which is knowing mathematics and then throwing some outside structure onto it and being like, oh, look, those volleyball players are using quadratics to serve over the net. Because no, they aren't. That's fake context to give you something to think is real in real life. The real relevance of mathematics comes from, like I mentioned before, seeing a situation and just noticing there's probably some math in there, and then deciding whether I'm going to pull it out, look at it, go deeper, and then use it, or honestly, pass right by it, just knowing that it was there because you have that choice. So is it relevant? Yes. Is what we're being told or isn't relevant or doesn't apply mathematics? No, that's arithmetic. Put it aside, you know?
Awesome. And so I know that, one thing that lots of teachers would love to be able to do is actually to make math more relevant, to help students see, the real uses of it, not the fake ones, right? That we get
Right.
in the word problems sometimes in the textbook, but the real uses of math. Do you have any tips for teachers, on how to bring that realness to the classroom in a authentic way?
Yeah, I have a bunch of chapters of them in here. But to be honest, it's the subtitle of the
Hold the
book.
book.
That's
Yeah.
yeah,
So hold the book up. So there's a
it's
whole
the
bunch of it,
subtitle.
right, in the book.
Right. And again, it's the subtitle, using today's experiences to teach tomorrow's lessons. And there's two layers to this, if I can bring this in. And the first is an overriding understanding that it is very difficult to veer off from a prescriptive curriculum that you've been given or have learned or have been taught and have been worked through to plan your planning and to do your assessments and everything. And to say, well, like, how often should I do something more authentic, or how often should I bring in an experience? And there is no answer to the how often. There is, however, the answer to that question as at least sometime do it, and that's where I want you to think about the experiences that we have. You can't, quote unquote, make math more relevant. You can't cram math into a relevant space and be like, now it's relevant. It matters to you. Use it all the time. What you can do is take the path of least resistance in a lot of ways. And the path of least resistance has kind of been looked on as a bad thing. It's like, oh, that's not a good thing to do. But in my situation, I really believe with this, that the path of least resistance can lead to the most momentum. And that those paths are created in situations like I mentioned here. Like if you have found, one experience for me is this. I love music. I double majored in math and music in college, and then I dropped my music to a minor. I'm a saxophone player, and my wife is a singer and a music teacher, and all of our kids are musicians. And it's just part of our life all the time. And my wife was auditioning for a new choral group in New York City a few years back. So I did what any good father of four would do, and husband and supporter of my wife. I drove the whole minivan into New York City and tried to find a place to park, which was not easy. And then dropped her off and walked my kids around the park for a little while to see what's going on. And as I came around a corner, I think it was on Fulton Avenue, there's a giant red cube sticking out of the ground. It's like 25 feet tall. It's got a whole board in the center, and it's on its end point sticking up. And I look at that, and the math noticer in me looked at that as like, oh, that's a cool thing. I'm gonna take a picture of it, and I did. And it got me wondering about it. Didn't really think about the questions too much until at the time I was a supervisor of a school district in New Jersey. And I went to a second grade classroom and showed them the picture. I wanted to say, hey, can I show your kids this? And I said, what do you think about this? What do you notice? And they came up with a lot of great questions. Like, I wonder why is it there? Like, why are there only red? Is there a red one? It's just red. Why is it red? And then some kid goes, how big is it? And now we're talking about a mathematical question, this idea of bigness. What do you mean by size? Like, do you mean how tall it is, how much it holds, how heavy it is, how thick it is? Where are we on this? And they started to think about it. And one kid asks, is there a yellow one? And I'm like, well, why would there be a yellow one? And he comes up and grabs one of his little Unifix snap cubes. He's like, it looks like these. I'm like, oh, that's cool. So maybe there's other ones around the city. And we started estimating how many of those little cubes it might take to fill that big cube in the city. And now in second grade, they don't talk about numbers over 1,000, but we started talking about numbers over 1,000 and extending their thinking. And I could have said, whoa, hold on here, kids. You're not learning about 1,000 until next year. So we'll revisit this in 11 months. But instead, you just take it with you. You allow both the path of least resistance and naturally following the flow of a question to become a real experience for kids. And that same cube I showed to middle school and to high school. They asked more mathematical questions like, what's the surface area? What's the volume? And they started to figure it out. And one group of high schoolers asked, I'd love to build one of those. Can we build one? So then I turned it around and said, well, the second graders were talking about it being like these cubes. There's 60,000 of these cubes in the elementary school because I just bought them for everybody. How big of one could you make? And they started playing with this idea of how big it could be. The relevance in that situation was they had a relationship with me, and our relationship allowed them to be interested in my interests. So when I showed them an interest from my life and an image that I saw, they were engaged with the questions that came out of it, and they asked their own questions. And if you know anything about kids at any age, and I have 4 of them in my house, they're way more interested in answering their own questions than they are about answering mine. And so I let them ask it, even if I had to lead the question a little bit forward, and then they dived in to want to be able to answer their own questions. So in an overriding principle, find the things that connect to you like that, or things that will connect to kids, and then turn it into an opportunity for them to ask questions. Don't look at something like, I don't know, fidget spinners was a thing a little while back. Don't look at something like that and think, all right, how can I come up with 4 lessons about fidget spinners? And here's my worksheet, and here's my graphic organizer, and here's my. Be willing to put a question out in front of kids and be ready to divert and roadmap them around until they get their way to the questions that they wanted to ask, and then set them loose. Because you can achieve an objective of their learning without being the one who asks the direct question for it. And then again, follow that path of their questioning, and then look for those opportunities. And nothing personal, but lie to your kids. That red cube question, I took the picture like 2 months before I showed it to the kids, but I told them it happened yesterday over the weekend. It's like, that just made it a little bit more close to home. And in my opinion, it's all right for that. So it's like, keep those things out there. And so sometimes you'll find one and tuck it away. And other times you're like, I have to talk about this now. This is an emergency. It's happening in the real world now. Open the door for it and see where you can go.
Oh, that's so good. I think I love that it all just stems from a picture, right? Mm-hmm. And then just leading a conversation. And, in that example, there's not a ton of extra prep that comes with it. I think that sometimes, at least for me, and I think about trying to create lessons that are more relevant for students. Sometimes it feels like I'm reinventing the wheel, possibly. But like you said, that's sort of the fidget spinner scenario, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're just saying, okay, well, I have a topic, I'm going to try to make it more relatable. But I love that you just took a picture and then just started a conversation there. And like you said, you have them ask questions, and you go based on their interests. And I think, in my college algebra class, that was something I sort of stumbled into on accident. I think we just started talking about finance because, like you said, you find something that you're interested in. And I love personal finance. I follow the financial independent blogs and stuff like that. And so once I started talking about that, all of a sudden, the algebra and equations and stuff like that, once we're talking about, savings and, money that you're making and taxes and stuff like that, everybody got really so much more interested in it than I think I'd ever had students interested in, some of these basic algebra concepts.
And, it's funny that you bring that up, because in the algebra level and up, like, money is very relevant because of its application like that. And it's very interesting to talk about money in class, because I get parents asking me like, well, when are my kids going to learn how to figure out a tip? I'm like, they're not. I'm just going to teach them percents, and then they're going to figure out that that's what they're supposed to do. But it's like, one of the things that has changed in the world with kids is that physical money is no longer relevant. Yet the whole elementary school curriculum is based on coins. We're using real money, and we're using nickels to count by 5. So I'm like, guys, kids aren't using coins. Like, even at school, when they were going to school, they were handing over a card to scan for their lunch money and handing it back. Like, so many kids are not holding on to physical money that it is actually irrelevant to use it as a tool. You can use it as a counting technique if you want, but let's not focus on the teaching of money. Let's talk about how the teaching of money is a thing that applies to skip counting or something like that. But when it becomes relevant because it's about a kid's future, about a kid's idea, or some kid wants to invest in Bitcoin, and all of a sudden, like, I wonder what's about that. And you're like, let's look into it. Let's find out what it's about. Is now a good time? Is now not a good time? That's their question. It's their idea. And I actually wore this shirt today on purpose. So do you recognize the quote? It says, "Shall we play a game?" It's from the movie War Games from 1986. So that's dating me a little bit. But and in that movie, the main character stumbles on a military supercomputer, and ends up starting a fake global thermonuclear war. But the reason he stumbled on it was because he was failing school and hated school. And he was hacking computers, went in, hacked his grades, changed the grades in the computer, and then stayed home for a week trying to figure out how to hack into this other supercomputer. like didn't eat. Literally, there was like a half-eaten sandwich on the side table, and like didn't do his laundry anywhere until his friend came and found him. She's like, "What are you up to?" Like, do you realize how powerful that kid's interest in that was? He learned so much. He kept digging and learning on his own. He was teaching himself stuff. He was figuring it out on his own. He was giving up his own time, his own nutrition, and practically his own life to figure out something else. And then he went to school and got bored. So that kid's personal interest, not his teacher's relationship and his teacher's interest, like that drove his learning. So what is it that our kids would be willing to give up food and school for? And then let's look at one more layer for that. If it's giving up food and school for his computer hacking world, what is it about what he's doing that he really loves? Not just how do I bring computer hacking into my classroom? It's what is he doing? He's actively problem solving. He's actively investigating. He's actively reflecting on something he learned and building on it. This kid is specifically able to work in isolation. Yet maybe those things for him were what were powerful for his learning. And in his classroom, there's no problem solving. There's no active growth. It's do this worksheet in a group. And he's like, I don't want to work with people on stuff like this. I want to do these other things. So we look at the characteristics of what students really want to learn from. And then that is what makes another layer of relevance. It doesn't have to be the activity, but it can be the characteristics of them that we can then bring into our classroom and say, what is in my classroom and what's missing from it? Is there a chance for them to problem solve? A chance for them to work alone or work together depending on their interests? A chance for them to maybe compete a little bit in a healthy way? Like, where are those elements that they love that I can bring in?
And are there different interests that you find for, say, elementary versus high school students?
You know,
To come up
as a generalization, no. Like the interest range, like I have elementary school kids who want nothing more than to make. Like I said, they want to use 3D printers, they want to use Legos, they want to build stuff, And then there's high schoolers who want to do the exact same thing. And my 9-year-old son is in 4th grade. Like he wants nothing more than to make something, but what he's making is games in Roblox. So he's actually writing code for games and buttons that work, and he's going on YouTube and watching someone else's code. And he's like, I can't copy and paste this, so I'll just retype the whole thing. And then he comes up to me, he's like, Dad, did you know that the code for making an active play button is local.parent.parent? I'm like, whoa. This is you, man, right? But so the interests are as individual as the kids, right? But that's why one of the ways that we really need to consider those moments is I don't want to have a full wide open curriculum based on student interest and my interest and a fully instant relevant moment, because it's difficult to create the emergence of the curricular patterns that you need. And it's difficult to really create, especially the prerequisite objectives that we need to build on skills if it's all off the cuff. But when we know those interests, we know those moments, and we have true and authentic conversations with kids, it becomes more obvious to us as to how we can cycle them into the structure of our learning, and how we can say to some of those kids in those moments, this particular skill is not honestly applicable to a real life conversation that I would want you to find or have. It is an application of algebra at a deeper level to show that you can actually do something fully abstract and try this out. But I'm not going to try to throw something on here and candy coat it and be like, one day you're going to be making cupcakes and you're going to need to use, no. It's just, hey, we're doing this for the pure mathematical value of it. And if you tell them that, they'll usually be more accepting of that learning when they know it, when they also know that you're trying your best to make sure that they feel authentically engaged with the content that does have an authentic real world application.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think, again, thinking back to the college, as I was reading your book and stuff, I think I always think back to my college algebra class, because it's the one that I struggled with the most, I think, to sort of, engage students and motivate students. And I think there's a couple of points that you made, I think, hang on, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here.
I throw a lot of points out all at once. Sorry about that.
No, there were so many good ones. And as you were talking through them, I was like, oh yes, I can totally see how that sort of played out in the classroom when I was talking about the finances. And I think that, you made a really good point that there is that balance, right, between hitting all of the learning points that you need to get through in a given semester, right? Versus making things relevant. Because that was one of the things that I found was we had so much fun with the financial topic, you know? And in my head, when I first started out, I was like, oh, we're just going to take like 5 minutes at the beginning of each class and talk about it. But because it was so interesting, all of a sudden it would take up like half the class. I'd have to cut everybody off so that way we could get through some of the stuff that we needed to. And it's definitely, I don't know, it's a balance, I think, in terms of getting through all of the different topics that you need to cover in a given semester, and then finding those moments where things are really interesting.
Yeah, and to just build on that a little bit more, it becomes more, I guess, everyday rote learning to the kids when the more we throw out on there. If I had said to a group of college algebra students, and that course is very abstract, it's this post-algebra 2, pre-cal kind of, it's like, really why? And so it's tough. If we throw out to them, listen, like, how quickly can you become a millionaire if I give you $10,000, right? And then say, go. Then they come up, they'll have to look up like how to become a millionaire. And then all this other stuff will come out, and they'll get standard investment advice. And they'll learn about risky investments versus non-risky ones. And then they'll think, oh, well, I could put it into this. And I would rather put it into that, even if it takes longer, because it's a guaranteed thing, like something like whole life insurance policies that are higher yield but longer time. Or like I said, we're talking about digital currencies and things like, well, I could try this, really risky, blah. Like, it's all on their own, and they're learning about producing money in an economy, period, right? Then once they've learned about that, the follow-up is extracting the math from it and saying, okay, you learned this, you saw this calculator that you went to talked about an investment, that you put this in and you put no more money else in, and it gave you this much money after this much time. And you're like, okay, I'm going to do that thing. How does that work? And then they have to figure out, well, how does that work? This is how percents work. This is the equation that they came up with. And now they can manipulate the equation and see if there's other things they can do. Too often we just present the abstract and say to them, here is the investment equation. P equals principal, or this and this. Or you pull out a TI-84 graphing calculator and you go to the financial program in it, and they're like, what is F of V sub I? And you're like, I don't know. You're never going to remember that either. Get rid of it. Do the math that produces a result, and then say, let's go in and pull out the skeleton that created this, and then let's build on it again. So that, again, it's a great class for asking that question and watching it go down an exciting road. And there's so much open-endedness to it that I encourage teachers as often as possible to let math occur. As Sunil Singh in his book, and I would say, like, in a playful way, just let math occur in a playful way. And eventually we'll reach a point where they either need more math from you because they don't have enough to go forward with their play, or they've reached an end point where you can say, define what you just did. Tell me all about it. Tell me everything you know about what just happened. Both of those create a really exciting environment for kids where math in and of itself is a relevant activity to do despite the content.
Right. And I love your example of, how long does it take to make $1 million if you start out with 10,000. I love them exploring it on their own because it gets them out of the cookie cutter, just following the exact directions for how you solve a specific thing on the worksheet. And there's 30 things that are all the same. I love that it gets them out of that and having to figure stuff out on their own and experiment, not necessarily have guidelines. And all of that is so valuable.
But it takes a teacher directly out of their comfort zone. And it also takes a teacher who, for lack of a better understanding of it, is perfectly happy with their file cabinet. Like, this is what I do. I like doing it. It takes this much time. I give this quiz. You got a C. That's fine. I'm like, you got a C. What don't you know? They're like, you got a C. Too bad. There are teachers who are still falling into that. And then they just say, I don't have the kids I used to have who used to get A's. Well, back off of that a little bit. And instead of that what works thing, maybe we can create an environment where you can step out of that zone, become uncomfortable, and yet at the same time, learn more about what your kids do and don't know and how to take them to the next phase of that learning. Because as a teacher, that is your job. Content delivery exists on the same box you and I are talking to on right now. Like, all the content is here. If all I'm going to do is talk to you about it, you don't need me. That's out there. So find a good way to get out there and engage with your kids' thinking and learning. And again, for some of us, it's like, you know what, well, I'm going to get paid a little bit more each year. And no matter how hard I try, they're not going to pay me any more for that. Well, who cares? Because we try hard because it's about kids.
Right. And I like what you said too about just getting out of your comfort zone. I think that when I think back to that specific example, with the finance, I was nervous, I think, talking about it the very first time because it was different. I didn't know how it would go. I didn't know how the class would go. And so, I think that's good though, right? Getting out of your comfort zone is so maybe if you're thinking about this as a teacher, if you're hesitant, right? Knowing that it should make you uncomfortable the first time you try having these different topics. It doesn't have to go perfectly. It doesn't have to go a specific way. Just sort of almost being open to failure in the sense, just assume like, you know what, you could introduce something. Nobody could care. Maybe there's no interest. Maybe it doesn't do anything, but really, it doesn't matter because you're just trying, and you'll find some winners in there if you do that.
And not only that, being open to failure in whether or not the activity is going to work, be open to becoming co-experts with your kids. You don't have to know everything to start learning something. Yeah. So if you look at it and you're like, well, I don't know everything about finance. I can't do a finance unit. How am I supposed to grade the kids? Well, how about you maybe don't? And they just express their learning and you're like, wow, you've applied this in a way that shows me that I should go back and give you a better grade on that equations section you didn't do so well on, because on this you show me you really understand it. Like that's a change in mindset that says it's okay for me to pose a question and learn alongside my kids instead of be in front of them learning it. And that opens the door to the possibility even more because it takes the time constraint of when am I supposed to learn this out? Well, you're supposed to learn it while they're learning it.
I love that. Oh, Dennis, you're full of such good advice. It's fantastic.
I'll tell my family that.
All right. So before we go, tell us a little bit about your books, actually both of your books, and where people can find the books and find out more about you.
Oh, both of the books are on Amazon and on Barnes & Noble online. Instant Relevance was published in 2016 and Hacking Math published in 2017. Again, they're here. This is through the Times 10 Publishing and through Dave Burgess Consulting. You can find them, like I said, you can find them there, and they both have Kindle versions. And actually, Instant Relevance has an active Desmos graph in the Kindle version. So that was great of Desmos to give me their API for that, which was awesome. So that's where you can find those. You can contact me. You can find me on Twitter at MathDennisNJ and on Instagram at MathDennisNJ, and that's Dennis with one N because everybody gets that one right. And my website, DenisSheeran.com, has a lot of information about how you can get in touch with me. If you're interested in having me become a part of what your school is doing, I'm still doing professional development and speaking and traveling. Right now, a lot of digital traveling, but I would love to start a conversation with teachers anywhere. And so just catch up with me in any of those spaces and just drop a line and say, hey, I saw your podcast with Allison and I just wanted to say hi. I'd love to connect and kind of know where you first came across me. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Fantastic. And before we go, one last question, since this is the Allison Loves Math podcast, I want to ask you, what is the number one reason why you love math?
Well, first of all, you probably got a lot of my energy up when you start talking about math, right? Long story medium, I always loved math as a kid because I was good at it. I was fast at it. I could do arithmetic well. I could explain it to people. And so like that was the thing that made me feel like I love math and I'm going to be a math teacher because of this. But what I really love about mathematics is not being able to do it quickly. What I really love is a question I can't answer. Question that makes me think, or a question I can answer, but has asked me to answer it a different way. Pam Harris is fantastic at that. She does something called the Math Strat Chat on Thursday nights. And the question really is just like, you know what? It's, what's 2.5 times 1.8? But how would you explain this? Out of the box ways of doing things, And what I love about math is that there isn't just one answer. A lot of people think the answer is what's important. And the answer in mathematics is the least important thing. It's the questions that are important. And so that's, I guess if I could say I truly love math, it's because what it does is it comes from questions and it just generates more questions. And, answers are easy to put aside, but questions keep you going.
It's a fantastic answer. I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was just so much fun getting to interview you and learn more about your ideas for teaching.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right. And thank you for listening. I will add all of the links in the, the comments for the Facebook Live. And if you're listening on the podcast, I will leave all of the links to get in touch with Dennis in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Zoom wave.